few weeks ago, I interviewed drummer Rat Scabies of The Damned. And like most of these interviews, I try to prepare the best that I could. Now, I've been a fan of The Damned since I was in college about a million years ago. But while preparing to talk to Rat, I also looked into the things that he had been doing outside of The Damned, especially since he hasn't really been an active member of the band in 26 years. But this isn't really about Rat Scabies. This is about the band that he's been in since 2016 called Professor and the Madman. And what I discovered was that the band not only included Damned bass player Paul Gray, but that the professor was actually a real-life professor. And that professor also happened to be Alfie Agnew, who is not only one of the famous Agnew brothers who were in bands across the West Coast like the Adolescents and Social Distortion and DI and TSOL, but he also happens to be a PhD in mathematics. In fact, he's the head of the math department at Cal State Fullerton. And while I could talk about differential geometry and general mathematical theory all day long, what really impresses me is that for the last several weeks, I have been listening to the hell out of this new Professor and the Madman record, their fourth album called Seance, an infectious concept record which might just be the most joyful record about dead people that I've heard in years. This is my conversation with lead singer and songwriter Professor Alfie Agnew from Professor and the Madman on Baxy's Musical Podcast.
It's Baxy's Musical Podcast.
Hey, Baxy.
Hey, Alfie, how are you?
How you doing? I just missed your call.
No, not a problem. Thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. I have to tell you, I didn't have any expectations when I heard the record, but then I interviewed Rat Scabies a couple weeks ago, and I have literally been listening to this record for 3 straight weeks. I absolutely
fantastic,
freaking love it. I will talk about that in a minute. I have to ask right off the bat, what's going on in California between you, Milo Ackerman of the Descendants, and Greg Graffin from the Bad Religion? I mean, 3 different guys with PhDs in math and science. Meanwhile, you got guys on the East Coast who need tutoring and gym. I mean, it's just what a stark difference between East Coast and West Coast.
Yeah, I think there's just so much sun outside. It just drives us inside where we can do nothing else but study.
Yeah, and the cold weather and snow makes us a little stupider. I have to kind of agree with you there. But you're the head of the math department at Cal State Fullerton. How long has that you been in that position?
2 years.
And do your students know that you're in a band with Rat Scabies, or do they not know that, or not know who Rat Scabies is, since he's probably old enough to be their grandfather?
Well, while I've been department chair, I haven't been doing any teaching really. So I don't have students recently, but before that, I taught for, I was just a regular professor for probably about 18 years. And I would say for the first 10 years, I wasn't really in any bands, because I took a long hiatus from music, kind of, starting in probably when I went out to graduate school in 94 through to about 2012. So about the first 10 years at university, I just flew under the radar and didn't mention about, the past with the Adolescents and DI and all that. But then at some point, people started figuring it out. Like I had a student do an interview for, I don't know if it was a school newspaper or something. It was all, "Are you the same guy from the Adolescents?" And I'm like, well, yeah, sort of. And so at some point it became impossible to kind of, keep it quiet, just embraced it. And, much to my pleasant surprise, I found it as a great icebreaker, a way to connect with my students. If I had known that earlier, I would have done it. I would have talked about it earlier.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I went to a college that where a good deal of my professors were Jesuit priests. I would be very surprised by a lot of after-class activities. Right. Maybe I'm better off not even knowing, but it's a big difference. But that had to be insane to you, that all of a sudden there are some students that might know of a band that was around when maybe their parents were in high school. I mean, that's
right.
that's got to be pretty remarkable.
It is. I'm not sure how it is everywhere, but out in Southern California, the younger generation seemed to be really interested in the old stuff. So there would be people wearing, band shirts from my era, from my youthful era on campus, and I'm like, wow, they're really into the older stuff. I'm sure there's plenty of interest in the new stuff too, because, the old punks aren't rolling in, money because of, hundreds of millions of dollars in sales or anything like that. But still, there was a lot more curiosity about like what went on in the 70s and 80s and 90s, even with Gen Zers and so on and so forth, compared to, I would say, when I was a kid, not really interested in what went on, in the 50s, even the early 60s.
Right. Well, you and I are about the same age. I'm probably a little bit older than you, but I have a niece that I would say about a year or two ago was at my father's house, and we went over there, and she's wearing a Joy Division T-shirt that she got at Hot Topic. So I'm thinking,
fantastic.
What a great way to to kind of break the ice. I'll have a conversation about Joy Division. So I start talking to her about the band and getting into some of the songs, and what I realized is she had no idea what the hell I'm talking about. She just thought it was a cool T-shirt. So it's like,
I get it.
So it wasn't.
It's a logo and a marketing thing, kind of more than a.
Yes, I mean if you ask the kid who's wearing the Misfits T-shirt what their favorite Misfits record would be, they probably don't even know what the hell you're talking about.
I see. Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I hate to break down any academic theories here, but I just think that a lot of kids they're interested, but interested to a point where they don't want to be bothered with the real details, because I just think some of the kids realize, oh my God, this is the stuff my parents listen to, or my crazed uncle knows, and they no longer want to have that conversation.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I figured something like that had to be in, just because there's not a lot of 80s punk bands, including the Misfits, that are getting rich. So it can't be because there's all this sales and they're selling out stadiums.
Right. Well,
there had to be some reason.
Exactly. You grew up in a house. You have the two older brothers, and they were in a million bands. I mean, the Adolescents. Rick played with Social Distortion and Christian Death, and Frank played with DI and TSOL. Was anybody in your house thinking about a career in math, or were you the only one blazing that trail?
I was the only one blazing that trail. I'm the black sheep of the family. So it's pretty funny when you grow up in a punk rock family and you're the black sheep and you're not, you have this, bunch of siblings. They're all goody goods going to college or whatever. And then you have the one rebel.
You must have been such a disappointment in that family.
Absolutely. It's funny though. It wasn't always like that. I would say from 0 to about halfway through my junior year in high school, I was, party line all the way. I just kind of had this change of heart that started happening halfway through my junior year. I was about 16, and by the time, so probably about 21 or so. Well, basically by the time I was halfway through my undergrad, I had realized, okay, I have to make a decision, because, the bands were touring so much and I was missing exams. It just wasn't tenable, and so I knew I was going to have to make a decision, and I pretty much knew what the decision would be. I had been in the music business long enough to know that there's no, you're so not in control of your future, and it's such a dirty business, and I enjoyed what I was doing a lot on campus, so I knew I was going to veer off into that direction. So I would say fairly early on, I don't think the decision I made surprised anybody. People could see I was just not like everyone else in my crowd,
right?
The music crowd, the punk crowd.
Well, for example, your brother Rick is significantly older than you, and I think Frank is just a couple years older than you. But in growing up in that environment and watching what those guys were doing, was there a sense that I want to do this too, or were you just more focused on academics from an earlier age?
That's a good question. So I would say I was always looking to do what they were going to do, the music thing. I mean, there was so much music in our house from the time I was born. I mean, I can't remember a time where we weren't spinning tons of records, playing air instruments and then real instruments. I was always really good in academics, though. I skipped a grade. They were going to skip me too, but my parents thought that wouldn't be great socially. I pretty much finished kindergarten in one semester, and so they bumped me up they let me hang out with the first grade. I clearly was doing well, but I just liked sort of the pats on the head, and I found stuff interesting too, I have to admit. But it was more just fun, we're talking elementary school days. It was more just fun, and then I kind of fell out of it at some point. I started getting more interested in sort of this social side of music, and that. So I sort of fell out of school related stuff probably from, I want to say, fifth grade till about I had my renaissance halfway through my junior year. I mean, I wasn't planning on finishing high school, but my dad wasn't willing to allow that option.
Right.
You just said, just get through. It'll be good to at least have a diploma, even if you don't, overachieve. And that was good because it kept me in long enough to change my mind. I was going through kind of the early teen angst years.
Right.
So he was smart enough to know he just had to get me through that, and then I'd come back around.
And do you remember what you were listening to at the time?
Oh, when I was going through my angst years?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. This was sort of, right during, the Adolescents heyday, into the year of Christian Death, Bad Religion, Social Distortion, Mommy's Little Monster era. So I was all in. I liked some of the British Oi stuff as well, Exploited, and, those guys. Gosh, I would say I started, and I was really narrow-minded. Like, if anything wasn't pretty strong hardcore punk, I was not interested and had nothing nice to say. but again, I think when I got kind of to I would say junior, senior year in high school, I started opening back up to what was my original influences which was British Invasion and prog rock, really. I wouldn't call myself a big prog rock guy like some people are, that are like priests of prog. I don't think I'm quite there. But I was raised on heavy doses of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, King Crimson, bands like that, early Genesis. And so that became interesting to me again. But the British Invasion stuff from the 60s, especially kind of the mid to late 60s, is probably my biggest, firmest, influence, I would say.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because I think when you listen to the new album, Seance, it's pretty clear that all those influences are still kind of percolating in there, and very much what you're saying. This is clearly not a punk record by any means, but it's got the harder edge because you're playing with Rat Scabies and Paul Gray. I mean, Jesus, what that I'd have to pinch myself every single day if I were in a band with those two guys.
Yeah, I maybe not every day, but certainly every week I pinch myself. That's certainly true. Probably one of the early albums that caught my attention out of sort of mainline hardcore punk was the Black Album, and then Strawberries. Those were two albums which were anything but hardcore punk. But they had such a reputation. You couldn't just turn your nose up at it. So you listen to it and you kind of went, wow, maybe there is something other than 200 beats per minute.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you have to go.
So I was big Gray and Scabies fan forever.
So when I talked to Rat a couple weeks ago, I asked how he got involved with you guys and he or how he met you, because I mean you're both on different parts of the world. And he explained it, and I want to get your side of it, because it is almost unfathomable to imagine that Rat Scabies. He said he was at an ugly Christmas sweater party that you were at. Is that accurate, or is that or is that not what happened?
If he was giving you just some dry, straight-faced British humor, and I told you it was totally not true, you would go, "Of course not." But you know what? It's actually literally true. That's exactly what happened. It was a lot of the people from the OC music scene involved, to be honest. And one of our good friends, singer for the old band Gurk and Ruckus and Electric Kool-Aid, Darren McNamee, was buddies with Rat. And so when Rat would come out to visit the West Coast, he would often stay with Darren and so on and so forth. And Sean and I were just fooling around, playing some covers for this little get-together. And there's Rat with Darren. and Sean and I are massive Damn fans, so we had like 3 Damn songs in the set. And so we just kind of hit Rat up and said, "Hey, we're going to play Smash It Up for an encore. You want to hop on the kit?" And much to my surprise, he said, "Yeah, why not?"
Wow.
It was fantastic. Made my year. First time I ever played with him.
I can imagine. I mean, for some people who may not be aware of Rat Scabies, I mean, this is a guy who was really part of creating punk music in the UK. I mean, that first Damned record is still such a valid record. I mean, New Rose, the first punk rock single, and here you are playing with him at a party, at a Christmas sweater party. It's no one would believe it if I now haven't confirmed it by 2 people.
Absolutely. It was just one of those weird things where, like, he just happened to be there. Sean and I just happened to be there, and of course, things like this probably would happen a little bit more often, maybe, but I think both Sean and I, we have a tendency to try to take advantage of things and make things work, to create good memories and to create good things. That, if you sit around and wait for the planets to line up,
right,
it doesn't going to happen. So I think that's part of it too, just being open to the unlikely.
So how did Paul Gray get into this? Because I mean, he and Rat, according to Rat, they hadn't spoken in like 20 years or so.
That's right. Yeah. I don't know for sure, but I think it's fair to say that there was probably some animosity for a while. I mean, I don't know if it was specifically with Rat and Paul or anything like that, but the Damned has always been a fairly enigmatic and has had lots of lineup changes. And, they've had a lot of issues. There's a documentary made about it, right?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So I think it's safe to assume that they weren't talking perhaps for a reason. Again, I should emphasize, I don't know of anything really directly between the two historically. Perhaps it was just, this side of the band, that side of the band kind of thing, maybe.
Right.
That's very true. So, when we approached Paul, this was after we released the first 2 records with Rat. We sent Paul the song Nightmare, and we said, "Hey, man, what would you do with this?" And again, this is not because Paul, Sean, and I go way back. I don't know if he knew who we were, other than those guys that played in the California punk. We just reached out to him, and he didn't get back to us. He didn't get back to us, but he not only got back to us, but he got back to us with a recorded bass line. And we went, "Oh God, we got to get this guy in." I mean, he just nailed it, right? I mean, Sean and I wrote these songs, so you'd think we would know exactly the bass line it needs. But every time we do that, Rat and Paul will come back with drum and bass tracks that far superior to what we thought of, which was already pretty good. And I think a big part of that is because of they're such big influences to us.
Yeah.
I mean, Sean will play bass a lot if we need a bass player, and he won't hesitate to say, "Yeah, I basically just try to play as much like Paul Gray as possible." And so that inevitably comes out in sort of the canvases we throw them to record on.
Well, the amazing part about it is, I mean, I always knew that Paul was great. I mean, everything from the Damned and Eddie and the Hot Rods and everything else he's done. But he's playing his ass off on this record. I mean, some of the bass lines he's created are like amazing. Probably the biggest surprise of the record is how good Paul Gray sounds.
Oh, it's amazing. And, that's something that was really important to Sean and I when we invited first Rat in there and then Paul, is get out of their way. You know what I mean? Sure, we're writing all the songs, we're singing the songs, and, we have visions and stuff. But when it comes to the rhythm section, just get out of the way. You guys are lucky enough to have gotten these giants, interested in your music. And they just get out of their way. And it's worked out swimmingly. I don't know if either of them, I'm pretty sure that Paul really hasn't had this much license in his career. I mean, in an operation like UFO, that was a corporate operation at some level, and I'm sure he didn't have free reign.
Right.
I just knowing what I know about Paul's playing, I think he had some free reign in the Dam, but probably not as much as he probably should have had.
So you're not really giving them. I mean, the way I understand it, you have been because you are, intercontinental. They're in the UK. You guys are you and Sean are in California. You're basically sending them through email the MP3s of what you've produced. Are you giving them any sort of instruction? I mean, or are you just saying, it's all up to you?
Very little. Very little. Because we kind of demo these things up and then send them over. And so, I might hop on the kit, or Sean might hop on the kit, just to kind of keep a beat, maybe for when the drums pull out,
right? Or
maybe where there's a break, just so that the structure of the song is kind of obvious. But we're not specifically trying to write drum and bass parts. And when they send things back, it's almost always different anyway. And thank goodness. It's always better, like I was saying.
Yeah, I mentioned that I've been listening to the record, constantly, and I'm not pulling your leg on that. What's amazing to me is you hear,
awesome.
Here you are, a guy who has a musical background, but you do other things, but the songs sound like somebody who has been writing songs since the beginning of time. I mean, I've listened to the other records and they're all really, really good, but this particular record, it seems like everything has come together where you could literally say, without exaggeration, this is the most joyful record about dead people I've ever heard. And it's
I love that. Can I steal that?
Of course you can.
That.
Please do. Please do. Cite your sources, Professor. But
that's right.
but it's true. These songs are very mature sounding songs, and I'm just talking from a songwriting standpoint, that these are not typical rock songs. There's a lot of care and work that have gone into these.
That's music to my ears to hear that, because we worked so hard on this. I mean, I think getting, so I've written music all my life, except for when I went on that hiatus, and it was a little rusty when I came back. But I think with Professor and the Madman, I think you can see the progression, as you're saying, and I think we're really rolling now. And we're taking more time, I think, to really not only write songs with no compromise, but also to produce them sonically, not based on modern standards, but just what we try to hear in our head,
Right.
And that's not always, the clearest. We want, we really like how vinyl sounds and how analog sounds. And on the other hand, it's great to have some digital resources to improve things that would have been improved even back in the day, like maybe having better EQing so you can hear more instruments, We've been working on that as well. Our skills, engineering and producing and stuff like that. I think with Seance, we really did turn a corner. I think you're right.
There's no question about it. And the title track comes off perfectly. I love the song Real Me. And then the first song I heard was Time Machine. And I thought, boy, I can't imagine what Rat Scabies thinks about this. But then I'm thinking back to like songs like Grimly Fiendish and even some of the songs on Phantasmagoria, and it's like, no, I can actually see him doing that, and it's like, because it's such a bouncy, happy song that you just don't think in terms of can these punk guys handle this? Of course they can. I mean, their pedigree is pretty broad and varied. So I mean, these are just such wonderful songs.
Thank you, and I think by us not being straight ahead, narrow punk, which again, I love me some punk, don't get me wrong. I still throw on the old records and all that stuff. But I think us being willing to sort of go wherever, to almost embrace the punk attitude of I'll do whatever I want, whether you like it or not. I think that helped in getting Rat and Paul on board, because I got the feeling that when Rat first said, "Yeah, I'll come up, from the beach and record one with you in your studio," I have a feeling he was sort of expecting something pretty predictable.
Right.
And the first song we did with him was "Devil's Bargain,"
Mm.
which is almost kind of vaudevillian in a way. And after we did that, his tone seemed to change a lot. He's all, "Hey, if you got some others, I wouldn't mind hearing them and being involved." And so I think doing all sorts of it probably gave them a musical challenge and interest, that led to them committing.
You also spent a good deal of time in the packaging. I know the vinyl version has got a
Yeah.
board game inside. I mean, I got the CD version, and the board game is there, and I can order all the pieces and the instructions to play. But you don't see that a lot anymore. I mean, nowadays everything is streamed and MP3'd, and you don't really get the sense of something to hold on to. So it's kind of cool
That's
to
right.
see somebody do that again and really make something of the packaging because I
Yeah.
remember the old, Dead Kennedys records, they'd have all these,
Oh,
posters and
man.
inserts and all this great stuff. It's like, it was almost as interesting as the music itself. And, and I miss that kind of thing.
I totally agree, and that's exactly why we did it. It was a lot of extra work, a lot of extra headaches, but that's why we're doing this. I mean, Sean and I are not doing this for the money, believe me. There's no money in it. But, you're alive, make make memorable things. And, Sean and I both loved growing up in the 70s and 80s with all that great packaging. You'd throw the vinyl on, heck, even the cassettes, and you'd pull out the packaging inside and just read through it as you're listening to it, throw the headphones on, whatever.
Yep.
That's the equivalent of like a 5-course dinner, with appetizer, salad, dessert,
I agree.
We're not interested in music fast food, which most is. And I understand that's just part of the modern age, but that doesn't mean there's not a market for something more memorable, more sophisticated, more immersive. Right?
I agree. I think there is a market for some level of craftsmanship, from top to bottom, the songs, the production, and even the delivery system. I mean, it's great to have music on your phone, but it's
Yep.
also great to have something in your hands. And
That's right.
that's what that's what I appreciate. I mean, as a fan, I appreciate the effort, and you don't see that very
Right on.
often. It's so
Oh yeah.
with COVID going on, obviously you don't have the ability to tour on this record, at least not anytime soon. Just on the university level, how has that changed how you guys at you are operating? Is it are you guys fully remote? Is it like a hybrid situation? How are you guys operating over there?
Oh man, it's completely changed things, more than anyone could have guessed. Yeah, we're basically 97% virtual right now.
Mm.
So very few courses are on campus. It's just at this point not safe. So the whole school had to learn how to become an online university basically overnight. Because everything went down so quickly last March. They basically sort of stopped the semester for a week and said, "Okay, everyone, you got a week to become an online university." To learn. And we have some older faculty who barely know how to check their email. So, and now all of a sudden they got to be like Zoom wizards, and So we limped through spring, but everyone did a great job, came together much better than I thought it would. The students were, on the whole, real good sports about it. It was stressful on everyone, don't get me wrong. And, there were incidents that needed to be managed and all that stuff. But by and large, I was very proud of the way both the students, the faculty, and the administration, the staff, came together just to make it work. We did the same thing in the summer and this last fall, but we were all a little smarter, a little bit more experienced. I still don't think, in-person education is going anywhere. I think there's a lot we need to learn and improve on, and more tools and resources we would need to make online education as effective as in-person education. We're not there yet.
Right.
but we're in a pandemic, so you can't exactly be too picky. We're going to start to try to, bring people back in fall, but that's to change day to day.
Absolutely.
As the CDC gives us guidance, as we find out whether the vaccines work, et cetera. So number one is to make sure the whole campus community is safe. That's number one. If we can't bring people back safely, then it's not going to happen. But of course, at some point, we got to start dipping our toe in if the CDC and all that gives us the all clear and try to come back. But it's going to change how we do business going forward. Online classes aren't going anywhere. There's going to be more of that. I think even after we're past this.
I have two kids in college. One is a junior and one is a freshman. And obviously, their college experience is vastly different than mine, and in many regards, that's probably the best thing imaginable. But nevertheless, I mean, they've had to. They've really had to kind of adapt to that situation. Whereas, I look at my daughter who's a freshman, and she missed her high school graduation. I mean, they did a high school graduation, but she missed prom and all these things. And then she's going into college, and she's like, I'm in classes. Half the kids don't have their cameras on, and I don't feel like I know anybody yet. And I'm going, man, by my first or second semester in college, I found every bar that would take a fake ID. I figured out how to sneak a keg into a dorm room. I mean, I did all the things that I'm so glad my children have not followed in their father's footsteps.
Yeah, and it's pretty rough. I do feel, for people, at the age of your daughter and your sons, because they are missing out on some, really important, like once in a lifetime social events.
Yeah.
That you'll think about for the rest of your life. At the same time, what can you do about it? So at the same time, I'm really impressed with how adaptable that generation is. Way more adaptable than our generation, I think. They're just a lot more mature about certain things.
Yeah.
We might have been more mature about other things, but I don't know. They're very adaptable, and I think that's a good thing.
Alfie, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Like I said, I truly love this record, and I will be continuing to listen to it for weeks in the future. It's so good, and thanks for spending some time today. It's been a lot of fun.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
The new album by Professor and the Madman is entitled Seance, and it really is a great record. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. You can reach me at baxandrock102.com. I'd love to know what you think. And again, thanks for listening to Baxi's Musical Podcast.